the easiest way to think about this is it's hosted virtual machines where Microsoft's doing the hosting. So when we're coming to talk about backups, Windows Azure backup, what I need to do is get across some ideas to you. So I've just described Windows Azure infrastructure as a service, as a sort of a hosted set of virtual machines. And that's sort of true, and it's sort of a gross simplification of what Windows Azure is. Windows Azure obviously offers the hosted virtual machine aspect, but it also offers a whole lot of other services, such as hosted Active Directory through Windows Azure Active Directory, which isn't exactly like on-premises Active Directory, but does allow you to have a single consistent account databases for online services such as Office 365, which might be then synced in to your local Active Directory. It also offers SQL Azure, which is a database in the cloud, and it now offers backup. Now, when it offers backup, what it offers is things called backup vaults. And I'll talk a little bit more about how they work in a minute. So when I'm going through this seminar, what I'm going to be talking about is I'll talk about how backup vaults work, how vault certificates work, how Windows Azure Backup works, and how Data Protection Manager works with Windows Azure. So when we're thinking about why backup to the cloud, the first question you think is, okay, why would I want to use Windows Azure Backup? I've already got backup to disk or backup to tape on site. And Windows Azure Backup isn't there to replace that. Windows Azure Backup is about providing you with an off-site cloud backup. There's other vendors such as Iron Mountain who have done this for a while, and it's another option for getting your backups off-site. And getting your backups off-site's something that most people know that they need to do, and depending on the size of the organization you're in, that'll depend on how diligent you are about actually doing it. Larger organizations tend to have great policies and procedures, and that they ensure that they get backups taken off-site on a regular basis. Smaller organizations, such as small to medium enterprises, tend to not necessarily be as good at doing things like that. If you've got one or two people who are running the IT for an organization and they're responsible for making sure the backups, it's usually, you're lucky if they're doing the backups right, let alone making sure that backups are being taken off-site on a regular basis. But the reason why you want to get backups off-site isn't just to meet compliance responsibilities. It's that sometimes you have an event that actually wipes out an entire site. And an example of this for me was that I had friends that worked in the city of Brisbane. Now, a couple of years ago, the Brisbane River flooded, and it basically overcame the central business area of Brisbane. Now, there were a couple of companies there that had data centers sitting in the basements of their buildings. And there was one wonderful photo of a shark actually swimming down the main street of Brisbane because the Brisbane River had got flooded. But not only were sharks in the main street, which sounds like a very Australian sort of thing, so I apologise for that, but some of these people had their entire site wiped out because the water just got in and flooded everything. So if having an off-site backup ensured that they were able to recover their critical data. There's another stat, I think it came from Gartner, that showed that after Katrina in New Orleans, 70% of the organizations that lost all their data had closed within 6 months of Katrina. So having an off-site backup's a really good idea. And the advantage of Windows Azure off-site backup is it's Microsoft sort of making this functionality available to a lot of people, whereas, and at a very cheap price. So yes, there are other alternatives. Yes, there are other vendors that allow you to do this. But if you're, say, looking at a small business that's only got a couple of servers, Windows Azure Backup might be something that's worthwhile. And even if you've got maybe 20, 30 servers or a bit more, using Data Protection Manager with Windows Azure for offsite backup might be a good idea. But the thing I want to reiterate is that when you're using Windows Azure as your backup location, the thing you've got to remember is that you're still taking regular on-site backups. All you're doing with Windows Azure is using it as a way of getting that data off-site. So, understanding backup vaults is a matter of thinking, this is like my backup tape in the cloud. So a backup vault is my backup tape in the cloud. It is the target for my backup. Now, each vault is protected by a vault certificate. And what a vault certificate does is it allows you to go and create a secure connection between your server that you're backing up and the vault itself. So obviously you're going to be transmitting backup data across the internet when you're backing up to Windows Azure. Your vault certificate is what's responsible for authenticating both ends of that connection, and it's also responsible for encrypting that. Now, you can create a vault certificate if you've got your own certificate authority. You can also go and get a utility known as MakeCert. And what MakeCert is it allows you to create your own self-signed certificates with specific properties. And I'll show you the command that you would use with MakeCert here. So you can see here, all I do is I specify a common name for the certificate. I give it a whole lot of options. I specify the length of the key, and then what it'll do is it'll output a certificate in CER format and also install that certificate on the server that I ran it on. Now, what you need to do is when you go and set up a backup vault in Windows Azure, and I'll be showing you a demo where I work through all of this, so it's not just going to be abstract, me showing you on slides, is that you create the certificate, you create the backup vault, then you upload the certificate, then you download the agent, and the agent uses that certificate to connect through to your Windows Azure account, and then it uses your account credentials and the certificate to set up backup. So you create the vault certificate, then you go up to Windows Azure. For those of you who are not really familiar with Windows Azure, you can get a 30-day, 200-hour free trial of Windows Azure, and that's absolutely worth doing if you have no idea what Windows Azure is. The reason I'm doing this webinar is that I've got a course coming out soon with Pluralsight/Trade Signal that's all about introductory Windows Azure infrastructure as a service for systems administrators. So up to a certain point, Windows Azure has been very much advertised as a, hey, this is a good way for developers to go and spin up infrastructure that they need. But Microsoft's now taking a much more IT pro-centric approach to Windows Azure and saying to IT pros, hey, this is another way for you to spin up your own infrastructure, your own virtual machines without having to wait to provision your own hardware. And there's also the ability to actually have Windows Azure on-premise so that you can move workloads to and from your own virtual infrastructure on Hyper-V into Windows Azure and back as needed. So the Windows Azure Backup Agent looks a lot like Windows Server Backup. In fact, it's almost identical. When you run the Windows Azure Backup Agent, you go and register the Backup Agent with your Windows Azure subscription on which you've created the Recovery Vault. You then go, as you would normally, go and schedule your backups. And of course, you can also use the Windows Azure Backup Agent to recover data. So scheduling backups, again, remembering that Windows Azure Backup is about getting data off-site and is not a replacement for your daily backup regime. With Windows Azure Backup, you can do 3 synchronizations to the cloud a day, and you have got backup retention for either 7, 15 or 30 days, and you have an 850 gigabyte per volume limit. So again, this brings back this idea of this is about getting critical data off-site. It's not about getting all of your data off-site. And when you're coming up with a backup plan, what you've got to really think about is what's the data that I've got to back up that the organization absolutely, positively, completely has to have in the event that we lose a site. What do we need to have? And also when you're thinking about Windows Azure backup, remembering that you've got a 30-day retention limit. Now, if you're using Data Protection Manager, which I'll cover a little later, you've actually got a 120-day retention limit. Now, if you need to go beyond that, that's where you go out to organizations like Iron Mountain, who can give you a lot more and also then might give you services that Windows Azure Backup doesn't, an example of which is some of these cloud services will go and create tapes based on your backup and then go and store those in a vault so that you've got much longer term retention. So if you have to have 7 years of backup tapes to meet your compliance responsibilities, there are cloud providers that actually will allow you to do that. So you just back up to the cloud and they worry about absolutely everything else. So here, as I said, 850 gigabytes in one session per volume. So if you've got more than 850 gigabytes on a volume, then you need to split that data or go and use Data Protection Manager, which is not limited in that way. Now, you don't do a full volume backup. What you're doing is you are selecting directories. That's again with Windows Azure Backup, not when you're using Data Protection Manager. And I'll again explain the difference when I get onto DPM in a sec. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video demo because obviously Windows Azure is sitting in the cloud and we don't want to be sitting around waiting for cloudy stuff to sort of happen. What I've done is I've sort of distilled everything down into a video demo and I'll show you that and I'll talk through how everything works. So the first thing we see here is the Windows Azure console. And what I'm going to do in the Windows Azure console here is I'm going to go and create my recovery vault. So the way I do that is I click New, I go to Data Services, I click Recovery Services, and I click Backup Vault. Now here I'm going Quick Create. Now the reason for this is that Backup Vault is still or may have just changed over from being in preview, and that's one thing with Windows Azure, is that Windows Azure is always introducing new features as it goes along. And when I did this, Backup Vault was in preview. So understanding that you get additional features as things go along. As things become more mature, then they get out of preview and they become proper parts of functionality. So the next thing I do is I need to provide a region. Now a region is essentially a way of specifying which data center of Windows Azure is the backup vault going to be sitting on. And again, remember backup vault is sort of like your backup tapes or your backup disk in the cloud. So go and choose one that's geographically close to you or which you've got good connectivity to. Obviously, if you're in the United States, you're going to pick United States. In my case, I pick West US because Australian connections to East Asia, even though East Asia is geographically closer, all go through the west coast of the United States anyway. So I go to West US and then I give it a name. And the name's just got to be meaningful to me. Sometimes with Windows Azure, you've actually got to select names that are unique globally, but in this case, Global Backup is fine. So I go and create the vault. So what happens is that Windows Azure goes and allocates space in the data center to host my recovery vault. So again, I'll sped time up a little bit so that we're not waiting around for that. We see recovery services, and there I've got my Global Backup vault. Now what I've done is I've clicked on Manage Certificates. Now in this case, if you remember from a couple of slides ago, I showed you a command line where I went and created a certificate. So once I've created the backup vault, what I need to do is I need to go and upload a certificate so that I'm able to identify and create a connection between a particular server and this recovery vault. So here all I do is I browse for the file, and you see I've got a nice little certs directory here. I specify the Globomantics certificate, and I upload that. And so that now uploads that certificate into the backup vault. Once that's uploaded into the backup vault, what I can do is I can click on the backup vault and I can download the agent directly from Windows Azure. So this is the software that I am going to use to run my backups. So here's Windows Azure Backup Installer. It's 17 meg. I just download that to my downloads folder. That comes down. And it's down. So next thing I do is I install the agent. So the agent, the first thing it'll do is it's going to install the dependencies. It's checking, have I got Windows PowerShell? Obviously this is Server 2012, yes I do. Your standard, where do you want to put this? Do I want to use Microsoft Update? Installation has occurred. Now, do I want to check if there's updates? No, I'm fine. So, the next thing I do is I've created a folder called Critical Data, and we can see that there's folder 1, folder 2, and I've got 2 folders in there called Important Files. Now what I'm going to do is register the server. Now what registering the server does is it allows me to make a connection between this Windows Azure Backup application and my Windows Azure subscription. Now, because I have the appropriate certificate installed, I specify that certificate to identify myself. I've downloaded this from Windows Azure, and it uses that certificate, and it says, okay, you've identified yourself. Here's your backup vault that you've created. Now you can have multiple backup vaults. So you might use different backup vaults for different workloads, depending if you wanted to have a DPM workload, Windows Azure workload. You can have multiple servers backing up to a single backup vault, or you can have different backup vaults. But remember, the way that Windows Azure works is that you pay for what you use. So with your data, just remember that the amount of data that you back up is going to impact on the amount that you're actually paying for your subscription. Another hint, if you've got MSDN, you also have, as part of MSDN, there is a Windows Azure subscription. So in my case, I've got MSDN. That gives me 160 hours of Windows Azure and $160 of Windows Azure, which allows me to run at least 2 virtual machines most of the time if I want to, but I've never got anywhere near my limit through my MSDN subscription. So here I specify a passphrase. So even though I've got access to the certificate, I need to use a passphrase to allow me to get access to that data. So if I want to do recovery, I need to know the passphrase. So this allows you to have multiple servers using the same backup vault, but recovery of data is going to depend on access to the passphrase. And for that reason, you can actually save the passphrase in text file format, which means that you can store it in case you lose it. If you lose it, then you're basically going to have to go and take a whole lot of new backups. So here I'm just storing it on the desktop. I click register. The backup agent goes up to Windows Azure, registers the server, and once the server's registered, I'm in a position that I can then go and use the Windows Azure Backup utility to perform a standard backup. So I can see there it said, hey, here's your backup passphrase, and I put it on the desktop. So if I minimize this, we can see a text file, and I've just got password as my password. So coming back to Windows Azure Backup, now that we've got Windows Azure Backup set up, what I'll do is I'll go and create a backup. So I click Schedule Backup, and I get a wizard that looks pretty much the same as Windows Server Backup does, in Windows Server 2012. So here I've said go and back up my critical data folder. Now, if I configure an exclusion, what an exclusion does is it just says I want to exclude all files of a particular type from this backup. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exclude all TMP files. So if there's any TMP files in that critical data folder tree, they're not going to be backed up. And that's a good way of getting rid of junk files that you don't want to back up in an otherwise critical directory. And I can do the same thing and, for example, get rid of MP3 files. So, for example, if I was backing up a file share where people were storing MP3 files, not that they should, I could make sure that the MP3 files weren't being backed up. Next thing to do is to specify backup times, remembering that you are limited to 3 times per day. Now, if you were doing a normal backup, you might be doing it more frequently than that, but this is your off-site backup. So this is how often do I want to save my absolutely critical data to the cloud. So here I'm saying do it every day and do it 3 times a day, and I've just decided on 3 times during the business day. Now, how long do I want to retain my backups for? And this makes sure that Windows, the Recovery Vault and Windows Azure Backup goes and deletes data after a certain amount of time, so I'm not paying for data that's been there for a year or 2 years or whatever. But this is important to remember in terms of how long I can recover from the cloud. So I've got 3 backups a day. I can go to 30 days with that 3 backups a day, so I've got 90 recovery points. And this works a little differently for DPM, and I'll cover that when I get to Data Protection Manager. So here I've said 30 days. I see my confirmation. So there's my 850 gigabyte limit per volume, but I can have multiple volumes, so I can go beyond 850 gig. I just need to make sure all of my critical data is stored on separate volumes. And I've created the backup schedule. Now that I've created a backup schedule, I can, of course, then trigger a point-in-time backup. That means backup now, don't wait for the schedule to occur. So it says, what do you want to back up? And it'll use my schedule backup settings. It'll perform the backup, and it's then going to go and sync that data up to the cloud. So it estimates the size of backup items, and the job's completed because there wasn't a whole lot of data there. So that's backup. Backup's fairly easy. Let's jump across to another server and do recovery. So to do recovery, first thing I need to do is I need to provide the server that I'm going to perform recovery on with its own little certificate. So even though I had the Globomantics certificate for the other server, each server needs its own unique certificate. So what I do is I jump into the command prompt. I run that command, but I'm going to give this one a slightly different name. I'm going to call it globomantics2.certificate. So I've run that. I've created the certificate. Next thing I need to do is jump into the Windows Azure console, go into Recovery Services, go into my Backup Vault, and then add the management certificate for the new server. So let's pretend we're off-site. Our original site's been flooded. We've spun up a server in our new site. We go and create a management certificate for it. We upload that new certificate. That then gets added to the vault, meaning that we can use this new server, once we've registered it, with the vault to perform recovery. So again, I just run the Windows Azure backup setup. I go register server. I specify the certificate I want to use. That uses that to identify my subscription and my vault. I specify the vault I want to connect to. I specify the passphrase for the vault. I specify where I want to save that passphrase. The server registers itself. So that's just what I showed you with the other one. But now I can click Recover Data. Now, do I want to recover it to this server or another server? I select the backup server, so we backed up that server. I can then browse the file. So this is very much the same as performing recovery through Windows Server Backup. Specify the volume. Here I've got my dates where the backup occurred. I've got my backup times. I specify what I want to recover. And it goes up. And so this is essentially the same processor, same process as you would go through normally. So here I'm going to go and recover to a separate location. So I'm just specifying the local volume C, and I've called it restore, and then create copies if there's the same data in the same location. Obviously, when I'm restoring to a new server instead of the original one, I'm going to have the option of recovering to a different location. There's not going to be the same data there. So what it does now is it reaches up to Windows Azure and goes and pulls that backed up data back. And if I jump into File Explorer and go into the Restore folder, I see there's my C volume, critical data folder, and there's my information. Okay, so that's Windows Azure Backup. And the idea of understanding the Windows Azure Backup client is that it's very much a single server solution. So you install it on a server, you might back up to a central location, but as nice as that is, that's not really a great solution if you're in an enterprise environment. Because in an enterprise environment, you want to centralize your backup. You want to have one server taking the backup, or one or two servers taking the backup, and backing up a lot of other servers, rather than having each server back up itself to the cloud and then doing all of that mucking about in terms of when you're doing recovery. Now, Data Protection Manager is Microsoft's enterprise backup and recovery solution. Data Protection Manager allows you to back up many servers, thousands of SQL databases, the whole thing. Now, Data Protection Manager is part of the System Center suite. I'm going to have a quick look at a question here. Is Azure Backup intended only for application data backup, or could I use it to do a system level restore as well? The answer to that is no, you could not use it to do a system level restore. It's only for application data backup. So when you're thinking about system restore, the key with system restore is that you have a whole lot of stuff that is non-critical data. For example, your operating system files and perhaps your program files. Stuff that you can get off-site either from re-downloading it from your volume licensing area or whatever. With Azure Backup, think of it only as what is my critical data that I can't replace. I can go and reinstall Server 2012, I can go and reinstall Exchange, but I can't go and reinstall the mailbox database, or I can't go and reinstall the files that are on the file server. I can go and reinstall the file server itself. However, with DPM, yes, you could, but no, you probably shouldn't. And the reason I say no, you probably shouldn't is, again, back up the data that's irreplaceable to the cloud. Don't go and back up the stuff that you can replace by having copies of the installation media. So that's sort of how I would deal with that and think about that, Brian. So coming back to DPM, DPM part of the System Center suite, so it actually goes and uses SQL Server to store its configuration data. You license it as part of the System Center suite. Now what happens with DPM is DPM goes and puts an agent. DPM can run agents on client computers and it can run agents on servers. DPM is designed by Microsoft to back up Microsoft workloads. So it's really good at backing up and recovering Exchange, SharePoint, SQL. The idea when you're using DPM with Windows Azure is that you will be backing up locally to your DPM disk. Now, when you back up with DPM, you can do snapshots every 15 minutes. So you're doing that, and you've got your storage array, and you're backing up there. And DPM gives you an insane amount of recovery time there. You can also then plug in Windows Azure so that you're backing up your DPM server to the cloud, so that you can take all of your backups that you've taken and then back up the backups to Windows Azure. And that's why you've got much more in terms of how much data you can back up. I don't think I've seen a limit written down. There might be one, but I don't remember ever seeing one. But you've got a 120-day retention limit on your data. However, the key there is that you've got a maximum of twice per day. So if you go twice per day, that retention range comes down to 60 days. So you go 120 days if you're doing one snap per day. You go to 60 days if you're doing 2 snaps per day. Now again, remember, this is about getting data off-site. So you're doing your every 15 minutes, you might be backing up Exchange, you might be backing up SQL, and that's where you're backing up to your local storage array. And then you're saying, right, twice a day, I'm taking my local storage array and I'll be backing it up to Windows Azure. And the key with DPM is that DPM does, and this is the same with Windows Azure Backup Agent, is it doesn't back up the whole file, it does block level backups. So only those blocks that have changed are being synced up to the cloud. So obviously the first time you back up all of your backups, that's going to be an insane amount of data. But when you back up your next bit of backup, it's only going to be those blocks that have changed since the previous. So does the backup encryption occur? Okay, so let's get to Scott's question. So what happens is that the backup encryption occurs according with Windows Azure Backup using that passphrase that you put in. So the certificate authenticates, the certificate encrypts the transport. Windows Azure itself, Windows Azure Backup then uses that passphrase to encrypt the data. So that data is encrypted, so depending on the strength of your passphrase, that's how encrypted it's going to be. DPM offers separate encryption. Brian's question is Azure Backup, Exchange and SQL Server aware when backing up? To clarify, other backup solutions have special modules. So in terms of, wait a sec, just got a cough. In terms of backup awareness, you'd really want to go with SQL when it comes to awareness. Certainly Windows Azure Backup and Windows Server Backup with the most recent versions of SQL and Exchange are aware of where all the data is, but it's not in the same way. So I would go with DPM if I was backing up those workloads, because when you're starting to think seriously about Exchange and SQL, using DPM is a much better way to go. And with DPM, it's all included. There's no module, so it's not like other products where you have to go and buy a separate module for SQL or a separate module for Exchange. All of those modules, all of those components are built into DPM. So DPM really, as I said, is designed by Microsoft to back up Microsoft workloads. So with DPM, what you do is you go out and you specify which service you want to protect. You create what's called a protection group, and then you've got the option of backing up that protection group to the cloud. And I'll show you that in the demo. Just give me a sec. Okay, so here we are on a DPM server, and what I'm doing is I'm loading up the DPM console. And that's just verifying that DPM is already installed. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create my certificate for DPM. So here I am, called it Globo DPM. That's succeeded. So I've now got my certificate. I'm jumping up into my Windows Azure console. Now I've got my Globo Backup Recovery Vault, but because I'm going to be doing DPM rather than Windows Azure Backup, I'm just going to go and create another backup vault. So in this case, I am calling it Globo DPM. I am specifying West US, because that's the closest to me in Australia, even though it's the entire Pacific Ocean. They are putting Azure into Australia at some point, but not when I'm doing this. Okay, so the next thing I do is I upload that certificate I just created on the DPM server. Now, one of the nice things about DPM is that I only have to register the one DPM server, even though the one DPM server might be backing up 50 other servers in my organization. So I only have to do the registration once, and if I want to recover, of course, I just go and register a new DPM server if I lose that existing DPM server. Okay, so I've gone and created my vault. The vault's created. Now what I do is I download the agent. Now the same agent works for Windows Server and System Center DPM. So it's essentially the same thing that I install on the other server. However, what it does is it gives me the ability to then use DPM rather than essentially Windows Server Backup. So I run the installer, and this again looks pretty much the same. So I accept the license conditions. It goes and installs any particular requirements. It says, where do I want to go and install it? It goes and installs it. Now, when I install it, the nice thing is it detects that DPM is present on the server, so it doesn't go and ask me a lot of questions. It allows me to do that from within the DPM console. So I go down to Management in DPM, I click Online, and it says this DPM server is not registered. So what I can do now is go and register the Data Protection Manager server with Windows Azure. Exactly, it's a matter of specifying my certificate. It uses the certificate as a basis to work out what I can go and play with. Because that certificate's only been uploaded to one backup vault, I couldn't go and see the other backup vault, because if I'd uploaded that certificate to the other recovery vault that I'd created, I would have seen more than one there. I specify if my connection through to Windows Azure requires a proxy server. Now, what DPM offers me is the ability to throttle my bandwidth. Now you can also do this to a certain extent with Windows Azure Backup, but the idea behind this is that it's not going to go and push too much data out over your internet connection during peak periods. Got a quick question from Sean. If DPM crashes and you have to rebuild the server, will you still be able to restore from Azure? And will you have to re-index? So if DPM crashes and you need to do another DPM server, what you would do is you'd go and rebuild it, you'd go and upload the management certificate, and then you'd be able to go and pull your data back down from, essentially you're importing the data. So there would be a degree of that, but you'd essentially be importing it, because obviously DPM's got to know what's in the recovery vault the first time. Okay, so getting back here, I'm going to enable throttling, and essentially you've got work hours and non-work hours and have different throttling there. Now, where do I want to use as a temporary recovery folder? So I've called that recovery temp. Here's my encryption. So this will encrypt the backup. So back to that earlier question I got about encryption. Again, we put in a passphrase, so depending on the strength of your passphrase, and you've got this little generate passphrase button over here that allows you to go and do that. I confirm my passphrase, and then I can copy that to a clipboard if I want. So this now goes and registers the DPM server with Windows Azure. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a DPM agent over on another server. So in this case I said go and back up BNE Globo SVR1. What this does is it puts the DPM agent on that computer, so I have to provide the local administrator credentials or domain admin credentials. Here I say, do I want DPM to restart the computer if necessary? In this case it won't be, but I've said yes. So what it's done is it's gone out and pushed the DPM agent onto that computer. So now that it's done that, DPM can see everything that's sitting on that computer, so I can now go and create a protection group. And this is exactly the same as you do it in DPM. So I've said, right, I want to go and back up servers. These are the servers I want to back up, and I can only see the servers on which I've already got agents. So in this case, I've said BNE Globo SVR1. It goes and queries that server and says, okay, this is what's on the server. And if that server had Exchange on it, I'd get slightly different information. If it had SharePoint on it, I'd get different information, and I could back up SharePoint as an application or Exchange or SQL as an application. So here I'm saying all I want to do is back up the critical data directory. So if you remember, this is what I actually recovered using the other Windows Azure. So here I've got protection group name. Here's my protection group. I want short-term protection using disk. I've then also got the option of allowing online protection. So it'll do short-term protection to disk. So this is where it's going to do my frequent backups. It's also then going to do the backups to Windows Azure. Just got a question from Nabil, hope I pronounced that correctly. Can I use Windows Azure backup with SharePoint Server, or it just work with Office 365 SharePoint? Okay, so you can use Data Protection Manager with SharePoint, a local instance of SharePoint. That's the way to go. In terms of what's online, you don't use Windows Azure backup to back up Office 365. Okay, the quick and easy way to talk about Office 365 is to point out that there's 3 copies of every hard disk up in Windows Azure, and that you've also got geo-replication with a service like Office 365. So if you lose it, Microsoft provides you with Microsoft will automatically file over to a different data center. But this utility is not for backing up your stuff running in Windows Azure. This is for backing up stuff that's running locally, where you're backing up your data to Windows Azure, where Windows Azure is functioning as your backup tape in a certain way of thinking. It's obviously an abstraction. You can also, if you have a tape drive connected, you can actually do long-term backup to tape. So you can have 3 different locations. You can say, I want to back up to short-term disk, also want online protection, and I want this to go out to my tape drives as well. Another question, can I use it to back up RMS protected files? Yes, both of them do support that, but you of course need your RMS keys to recover. So RMS is just like it's backing up normally. So here's my retention range. Now, so this is my short-term retention range, and here I specify how long and how often I want to snap when I'm storing stuff on a local disk or on my SAN. And this is looking at my disk allocation. Now, how do I want to go and create the first replica? That is, how do I want to back it up? And I'm saying, okay, do your initial backup now, or I can do it at a later point in time. Where do I want to put it? Again, creating the replica. Run consistency checks. Run a daily consistency check, and this is just ensuring that my backup is being checked to ensure the integrity of the backup. Now I'm being asked, where do I want to go and what do I want to back up to the cloud? So you don't have to back up everything you're backing up to disk to the cloud. And I've said here I want to back up that C critical data folder. Here I specify my retention range and my synchronization times, given that I've got 2 syncs per day. So I'm doing syncs every 15 minutes in the short-term protection. I'm doing syncs twice a day with my backup to the cloud. I create the group, and what it does is it goes out and configures the settings there. Now, what I'm doing is I am creating a recovery point, which allows me to basically perform a backup. So it'll go and create a recovery point to disk. It will then go and synchronize out to Windows Azure. So what I can do now is I can perform a recovery, and this is just pulling data out of Windows Azure. So I can choose, do I want to recover to the original server? So remember, with Data Protection Manager goes out and puts agents on other computers, which means I can go and recover data from my DPM server out to other servers. So I can recover from Windows Azure through my DPM server to another server sitting in another location. Or in this case, I choose to recover to an alternate location. Again, I can go and recover that. In this case, I'm saying, hey, go and recover it on my DPM server. Or I can go and recover it on my standalone server. Now, on my standalone server, if you remember, I had my restore folder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to recover it to this folder called certs. I click recover. It goes out to Windows Azure. It pulls that data down, and then through DPM, it'll go and write it to that other server. Obviously, that will take a little time. It won't be as quick as doing it from disk because it's got to pull it over the internet. And I can then jump across to my other server. And of course, the proof is in the pudding, as we like to say. I don't know if that's an American expression as well. Jump into File Explorer, go into the certs folder, and lo and behold, we have my restoration of data from Windows Azure. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about today. Please keep in touch with us on facebook.com/TrainSignal, the @TrainSignal Twitter account. My Twitter account is @OrenThomas. If you've got any direct questions, you've also got the YouTube channel or the LinkedIn area. Thank you very much for your attention. If anybody's got any questions, please ask them in the questions area and I will address them.